So this article came out a couple of days ago and it got me really, really fired up. And a few topics in racing really get me angry. But one of them does. And it is when we talk about a quote unquote new car in IndyCar, because it always seems to be going completely the wrong direction. And this unfortunately is no exception. I'm going to try to be as fair as I possibly can be in this video. I mean, I think everybody is working hard behind the scenes. There's no doubt about it. I think everybody, myself included, wants to see IndyCar be the most successful it possibly can be. And I'm not accusing anybody quoted in this article or anybody involved as not wanting the best for IndyCar. But I think we all have a different vision of what we think it should be. And the folks who have gone on the record in this article, I want to discuss what they have to say, because I think there are some correct thought processes at hand, but I think there are some misconceptions or misunderstandings that are going to take this thing in the wrong direction if we don't hold those thoughts accountable or those ideas accountable. And since there is such a long time before the new car, allegedly 2027, we have some time to fix some of these thoughts and some of these problems. Or at least I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and kind of tell it how it is. And, if the decisions are made that maybe you're being mulled, well, I tried to warn you. Link is in the description for this article, by the way. Great work by Marshall Pruitt to get these quotes from many of the team owners and do the digging on this, because it's pretty interesting. There's no doubt about it. So I'll try to go through this as quickly as possible. Did this on the DL 500 Club if you want to watch a really extended version of this article and having it broken down. But essentially, the team owners saw what has been proposed as the 2027 IndyCar chassis in October. Now, my understanding is the drivers have seen it too, so it has made the rounds. But what I think is positive about this is what's kind of highlighted in the second paragraph, which is that IndyCar was doing this to elicit feedback from the team owners, to elicit feedback from the drivers, to understand, what the market, the folks who are going to be buying and driving these cars actually want out of the car, which I think is positive and I think is productive. There's no doubt about it. So I think for sure we can say that's a good thing, 100%, absolutely a good thing. But when they showed it off, and this is where we're going to get into a bit of a thing that just makes me right idea, wrong for a lot of reasons. An owner sent an email to most but not all, which is an interesting statement, to the owners urging for a complete do-over of the 2027 concept. In a group email, the owner said they attached a photo of the Red Bull X1 open-wheel concept penned by Adrian Newey as an example of the forward-looking design they want to see emerge from the new car development process. Now, that's a really stupid thing to say. Who would say, oh, wait, I said that. Now, before I rip this idea, and I am well aware that I'm ripping an idea that I have proposed before. Now, I would say this. I proposed this half a decade ago, 2020, in the middle of a lockdown where I don't think anyone was thinking clearly. Certainly I wasn't. But we also hadn't seen a single aeroscreen IndyCar race. And what was everybody doing during the lockdown in IndyCar Twitter? They were complaining about how the aeroscreen looked. So what did I do? I said, well, what's a car that has kind of an aeroscreen that looks good and it's kind of open wheel adjacent? Well, it's the Red Bull X1. But since then, I have kind of grown and matured, and time has passed. And the thing about the Red Bull X1, while it is a very good-looking car, there is no doubt about it. And we'll talk about it a little bit later, too, when the team owners start kind of voicing their support for the Red Bull X1. But suffice it to say, the Red Bull X1 was designed the same year that the DW12 was, which is 2010. This is a car that in 2027 will be 17 years old. This is a 17-year-old concept. And not only that concept, the concept itself doesn't really make sense practically, at least for what IndyCar supposedly is trying to do, because this was a car designed by Adrian Newey. Yes, that's awesome, but it was designed, number one, for a video game, to sell to sell the Gran Turismo 5 video game and cans of Red Bull. But it was designed as a car that has no rules. So unless you want to go make the race cars significantly faster, because playing this car in Gran Turismo 5, this car was capable of speeds of well over 270 miles an hour, and sometimes in a draft 300 miles an hour in a straight line. The cornering G-forces, I think, were over 8 Gs at times in the corners. I think it lapped the Nürburgring GP course under a minute. This is a car that, yes, it looks good, but the concept of it is completely not anything what IndyCar has been trying to do for the last 25 years. Asked to share the rendering, specifically the rendering that Penske Entertainment showed to the IndyCar teams, they declined the request, but did say they could elect to do so at a later date, which I would say disappointing, because we really don't have anything to talk about. That would be nice to have, but I do understand, and I'm going to defend IndyCar here a little bit, because I do understand if they showed this render, they would get ripped apart. Like, it's just how it is. And I guess if you want negativity out, that's the way to do it. You don't have to worry about the fans ripping you apart. And I get that I'm part of the problem on that. I will fully admit it. Owners who have spoken with Racer describe the 2027 concept as a lightly modified version of today's car, with a large, billowing Formula 2-style wing array affixed to the rear. In various ways, those who offered opinions called for starting over with a bolder, more creative take on the looks of the next chassis, citing Newey's X1 as an example for IndyCar to follow. The 2027 car, like the DW12, will be created by Dallara as a spec vehicle, being the tub that carries the driver along with its bodywork, wings, and every aspect of its outward appearance will be a fixed design that cannot be modified. We'll talk about that here in just a second. Let's show the F2 car off first. This is the new for this year F2 car. This was revealed in 2023, and when I first saw this car, I said, oh, that's probably whatever the next iteration of the IndyCar will look like, and surprise, surprise, this is what it looks like. You could obviously imagine that car without an airbox on it and an aero screen, and you would probably be pretty close to what the next IndyCar looks like based on the description that we have. Now, should IndyCar be modeling itself after a feeder championship race car? I would say absolutely not. No. I think the last thing you want to do if you're IndyCar is draw any more comparisons to yourself in a feeder series, because at the end of the day, IndyCar only works if it's not a feeder series. If it is a feeder series, if we have just accepted that this is where rich kids are going to come and drop all of dad's money, and I get that that's a big part of the business model of IndyCar right now, but I would also probably argue that you might want to rather be an F2 owner right now in the market than an IndyCar owner, because you're probably making more money in F2, and that's just the reality of the situation. And here's the thing that really kind of grinds my gears about the F2 comparisons is that, yes, they debuted a car earlier than IndyCar by a year in 2011, which ran through 2017. But at this point in the lifespan of the DW12, and potentially there might be one more coming for Formula 2, we don't know. Given the lifespan, and given that 2027 is the next year, maybe not. But the fact that Formula 2 has executed 3 separate chassis designs in the same amount of time as IndyCar, and I get that the IndyCar has changed visually since then. There have been safety improvements, bodywork improvements, under tray improvements. We acknowledge that. We understand that. The car does not look the same. But it is crazy that Formula 2 is able to execute that quickly. Let's talk a little bit about the spec nature of the car. I guess what we'll talk about first, there's the photo of the of the Red Bull X1 as I showed you. It is, I mean, it is a good looking car. There's no doubt about it. Adrian Newey, left to his own devices, shock of shocks, knows how to design a race car. But there are some dated elements to this car. The high nose, very reminiscent of Formula One in 2009. That's just not how race cars look anymore. This car would not look the same if Adrian Newey designed it today. And I think that's something that's really important to note. Mark Miles is quoted in this article, and I'm a bit confused as to why. This would seem that this would be something that maybe Jay Fry should be commenting on. And I get that it's in vogue to crap on Mark Miles, but just something that I kind of was surprised about in this article. But this is what Mark had to say. The number one priority isn't to see how inexpensively we can do it, but cost is going to be a consideration as things get developed more narrowly. Dallara is on point to develop the chassis with a lot of other supplier partners, and it is very much a work in progress. So from my perspective, we are not looking for a referendum the first time we put renderings of the car forward. We wanted feedback, and it continues to be. It is changing. It will change. I mean, that's a very, that's the answer itself, unfortunately, and I get that Mark probably is right to be very neutral these days, because I drove past a Pato Who billboard on my way to lunch today, right? So this is a very corporate answer. But when you start hearing what the team owners have to say, it seems to fly in the face a little bit of not only what Mark is saying here, which is this seems to be a very hands-off, corporately driven approach in the sense that it's such a foregone conclusion that they're going to do a Dallara. They're going to do a Dallara that has a lot of crossover with the current car, and consequently, as Marsha points out in this article, it's going to look almost exactly the same as the current car. That's not what the team owners want, and I don't think it's what the auto racing market wants. And before we start talking about what the team owners have to say, I think there's and I'm going to say this, and I'm biased because I've been arguing for this for years, and I'm going to continue to say it because I think it's the truth, and I'm going to tell it like it is. I think the team owners, and you'll hear this in their statements, maybe don't understand or maybe don't realize they're arguing for this, but they are, because they can't. What the team owners are asking for, they cannot have with a spec car. The regs have to be opened up with the chassis or the engines or something, because you want to make a big splash. You're just not going to be able to do it with a spec car. You're not going to be able to do it with cars that all look exactly the same. Let me give you a great example before we get too far into this. Let's say you want to design an open wheel car, and you look at the Red Bull X1 and you say, yeah, that looks really cool. I think that's going to appeal to gamers. But all the cars have to be exactly the same, and also, the engine's not going to be super inspiring. Do you know what you end up with? I think, and here, this might be a hot take, but I do think the Gen 2 Formula E car is a pretty decent looking race car. I'm not going to lie. It is goofy, but it is futuristic looking. Kind of neat, different, very, very, very different from Formula One or IndyCar or anything else that's racing in the world right now. Let me break some news here. This car did not move the needle for Formula E. Nobody cared. They were all the same cars. They all had the same uninspiring power plants. This car did not do anything for Formula E. And this, I think, is what you'd probably end up with if you went the Newey route with IndyCar. You'd end up with something similar like this. Now, if this car showed up and raced against a bunch of DW12-looking cars, then you'd have something. Then you'd have something that would be noteworthy, something the media would want to talk about, something the fans would want to talk about. But if every single car, it doesn't matter if every single car looks like. If they all look the same, if they all have the same power plant, if they all have the same hybrid unit, if they all have the same tires, there's nothing to talk about. There might be something to talk about for the first couple of races, but it can look however you want it to look, and it will move the needle briefly, and then it won't move the needle again. So let's talk about what some of the team owners had to say with that being said. And case in point, here's what Mike Shank had to say. Let's make a car that people talk about outside of IndyCar. Let's up the game. Let's turn it up a notch with something that really brings people back to IndyCar design-wise. Let's get it out there visually because we're all in the same car. Let's make a car that's appealing. Again, I like where Mike's head is. I think Mike is thinking the right way. But I think the flaw in this, as I've just argued, is this line right here. We're all in the same car. That's the problem. The team owners want something cool. My heart loves that IndyCar Racing wants a clean sheet design because ultimately that's what we need. We need every tool we can to draw new people in. And I think the car, a really wild concept, is important to how we get there. That's a great thought. That is a great thought. But you can't have that with the same car because it won't be special. If you want different cars, if you want cars that have a wow factor to them, they can't all be the same. You can't have it both ways. To a certain extent, IndyCar is actually doing the right thing to a certain extent by keeping the car almost exactly the same as the DW12 because they probably realized that if they went super wacky, it wouldn't move the needle at all. That's what's tough. Dale Coyne weighed in on the concept that he saw. It's not futuristic. It looks the same. It's like the current car. You updated it by a couple or 3 years, but it doesn't look like a modern car. I think we can take a bigger step. There should have been 2 steps beyond what was shown. Let's make something that has a wow factor that gamers would look at and say, yeah, that's really cool. Again, I think Dale is on the right track here. I would say to the gamers, to appeal to gamers, perhaps, and this is not Dale's fault, but if you want to appeal to gamers, perhaps have the car that you're currently racing and will be for the next two or 3 years in a video game. I think that would probably help appeal to gamers like in the immediate future. But again, like this car did not appeal to gamers. This car did not make a bunch of gamers watch Formula E. This checks every box that the team owners are talking about right now. And I think to be futuristic, you have to have a level of competition. You have to have, because this is the thing about auto racing. You always have to have a problem that is being solved. What are the regulations for the race cars that are being built? What problem are you trying to solve? What problem is currently being solved by IndyCar? What is the design challenge of an IndyCar right now? Right? I think that should be a question that's being asked with this new car. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to do differently than what the current DW12 is doing? And if you can't answer that question, and I hate to say this because I do want a new car. I want new regs. I want there to be forward motion in the history of this sport. But if you can't answer the question of what are we doing and why are we doing it, then you're in a pretty tough spot. And back to Mike Shank's point, I would say this. I think from a casual fan perspective, and I think even from a hardcore fan perspective, it's not so much about how the car looks, it's about how it sounds. If you guys ditched the V8 engine or the V6 engine and went with a V8 or a V10 or a V12, I'm telling you, that would really appeal to a lot of people. Do the opposite of what Formula One is doing. Because I have a very good perspective now, having been to an F1 race. Be the opposite of that. Be as loud as you can be. Bring the high-pitched noise back. That's what the people want right now. If you really want to make a wow factor, it's the sound, it's not the looks. Rahal Letterman Lanigan co-owner Bobby Rahal wasn't as passionately opposed to the 2027 render, but he did reference his old friend and former IndyCar race engineer Newey and reiterated there's time for other concepts to be evaluated before the design is finalized. Rahal said, I didn't get a sense what we were presented was a done deal. I thought it was here's where we're thinking of going. These are the areas we're thinking of pursuing. Let us know what you're thinking. Okay, that's great. I love hearing that from Bobby. I love hearing that IndyCar. That's kind of what IndyCar's thought process is with this process. The only thing that I would say here is that how how is it not a done deal right now? Like, what are we like? I thought there was a massive priority to have a new car, and I get that it's 2027 and it's a while off, but like that's going to quickly approach. How do we not have something locked in yet? Ray Hall is talking about Newey here. Last year, Adrian and I were having dinner. And the thing everybody forgets is nobody really cares what radiator size you have or do you have strakes on the car or not. They care about the overall look of the car. That's what excites them. And I did tell that to IndyCar. I think Adrian Newey is right. I think Bobby Rahal is right to point that out to IndyCar. Yes, like overall, the car has to look good. So how do you produce a car that's simple and yet so compelling that it isn't going to be easy? But that's the challenge. Well, I think, again, to the point of Mike Shank, I don't think you can do that. I think to have a compelling car, you need to have different cars. Like you can't just have all Delaras. Or you can't just have all Delaras that look exactly the same. Maybe you can have all Delaras, but maybe you open it up and let the teams, kind of have free reign to do what they want to the cars within reason. I think that would get people interested. Chip Ganassi owner Chip Ganassi, wow, incredible. I couldn't believe Chip Ganassi owns Chip Ganassi, who believes Penske Entertainment will go with a large volume of carryover parts, which would keep the 2027 design from being vastly different from the DW12. Offered no opinion on the looks of the car, but did have staunch feelings on where the visuals rank as a priority in the design process. Wanted to underline Ray Hall's opening comment. Nothing is written in stone here. Nothing is locked in, says Ganassi, which is great. You have to make the car engineering-wise what you do what you needed to do first when it comes to safety, maintenance, race on road courses, ovals, all the above. And when you say, okay, now let's work on what it looks like. You don't say work on the looks first and then make it do all the things you need it to do. Okay. You need to build a car with function over form. Form follows function. When all these guys saying it needs to look this way or look that way, you're putting form before function, and that's where we'll disagree. So Chip, in principle, I completely agree with Chip in what he's saying. From a race car owner, team owner perspective, yes, of course, you want the car to be safe. You want it to be easy to work on. You want it to be able to race on all the racetracks perfectly. From an entertainment standpoint, you need to make sure the car looks good. I think that's where Chip's kind of missing some of this. I don't think you want all the cars to work perfectly. I don't think you want it to be easy to set up or maintain. Because I think if you have a wider gap between a performance or the performance window to be wider with a new car, I think that's what you would try to do. I mean, look at 2012. 2012 is the last time anyone not named Penske or Ganassi as a team owner won the championship. The first year there was a new car, and then the whole rest of the time it's been Penske and Ganassi. You want that performance window wide because there's an opportunity for other teams to figure it out quicker than Penske and Ganassi, and you have a more competitive series. That's one of the huge positives of changing the car. So from this perspective, like I understand what Chip wants, but what I would say here is that, if you want to perfect the car, you want a perfect car out of the box, perhaps don't advocate for a spec car then. Because if you have a spec car, you have to create the performance gap somewhere else so that there's compelling racing. Because if everybody has a perfect car, all they'll do is run around in a line the whole time because no one will be able to pass because everybody's car will be handling perfectly and it will be a boring show. So you want a good show, and yes, you want a good car. But totally agree with Chip. You do want function to follow form, or form to follow function. 100%. I completely agree with you. You have to design a race car first. But when it's a spec car, you do have to take into account the marketing aspect of it. The fact that the fans have to like it, latch onto it. Because if you're racing this, people might not like it. People might not want to watch it. It might not get people to tune in. Zach Brown ends this article out. Turning the conversation to the future, McLaren CEO Zach Brown mentioned McLaren's assistance in helping Formula One with the technical and styling processes for its next set of regulations. If Penske Entertainment needs new concepts for the 2027 car, Brown is willing to deploy McLaren's creative team on the matter. What I can tell you is we and other teams have worked very closely with the FIA on the next Formula One car in a very collaborative way. We have contributed our engineers, simulation, and design staff to help. They've achieved great things together, and we would welcome doing the same in IndyCar. I appreciate that sentiment from Zach. Here's the thing that I would say about Zach, and I 100% understand that I'm spending other people's money when I say this. Zach Brown is the CEO of McLaren, the McLaren racing side of it specifically. McLaren Racing is a race car manufacturer. Maybe you don't need IndyCar's help to do this. By which I mean, why not, McLaren, design your own car, design a set of regulations that you would like to see IndyCar employ, and then invite Dallara to build or conceptualize a car to the McLaren designed regs, and then have a couple of different chassis. And I think that would really amp up interest in IndyCar. McLaren is one of the most active teams in terms of interest level in creating interest in IndyCar. And again, I'm spending other people's money by saying this. I 100% understand that, but I don't think there's anything better an IndyCar team could do that has the manufacturing capabilities to do something like this would be to design their own IndyCar. You don't have to build one yet, but float the waters, float the boat out there. Imagine the headlines, and then maybe we can move the sport forward. Because at the end of the day, the team owners want to have it all. They want to have a cheap car, but they want to have a radical car. But they want to have a car that's going to appeal to the masses. But they don't want to change the V6 engine. They want it to appeal to gamers. They don't have a video game. There's all of these things that, like, we're at a crossroads here, and it frustrates me. And as someone who really does care about this series, wants it to be the best, when articles like this come out, it's just like just deflating. And then an IndyCar, the only thing I could really criticize them about right now is that they are taking, as they have done, not only in the Penske Entertainment era, but even going back to the Holman George era, they are taking one of the most conservative approaches they could possibly do. Doesn't get more conservative than saying, we've got a new car, but it looks exactly like the old one with an F2 wing on it. By the way, the F1 cars are not going to look like the F2 cars starting in 2026. So maybe don't copy the F2 wing, because it's not even going to look like an F1 car. It will look like a previous generation F1 car if you do that. I mean, this is the stuff that just, and I'm not as fired up as I was a couple of days ago when I read this article. I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed. And that's all I can really say. Thank you guys, and we'll see you in the next video.